us about some new information that you've learned from this?
Great. Well, I'm excited to talk about this. The CDC put out a report about all the hospitalizations that took place across the country for all of March. So this is really new emerging data. They're going to keep reporting this kind of data on a weekly basis, but at first they only had enough time to collect all the information for March just recently. And what they found is that 89.3% of hospitalizations in the United States for COVID-19 were of individuals who had underlying medical conditions. And that is regardless of age. And the conditions, the underlying medical conditions that people had differed a little bit based on their age. But again, overall, 89% of people who needed to be hospitalized in the United States for COVID-19 had at least one underlying medical condition.
Okay, and like, does it talk about what these medical conditions are? And I'm wondering specifically, are these typically within somebody's control?
Okay, great question.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, the most common underlying medical condition for people ages 40 and under was obesity. So that's obviously, we have a lot to do in terms of determining whether or not we're overweight. And of course, that was actually a underlying medical condition that we saw across the spectrum. So even older adults who were hospitalized with COVID-19 had fairly high rates of obesity, but it was highest in that younger age group. As individuals got older, the underlying medical condition changed. So for the middle adult, 50 to 65, obesity was a high driver, but elevated blood pressure was the most common driver of underlying comorbidities leading to hospitalizations or associated with hospitalizations.
High blood pressure. Okay.
High blood pressure. And for individuals over 65, again, it was high blood pressure. And for both groups, the second most common comorbidity or underlying medical condition associated with hospitalization was cardiovascular disease. So developing calcifications in our arteries, in particular the arteries around our heart, and also in the blood vessels that feed our brain. Those are where we develop risk for heart attacks and strokes, respectively. So,
all right. Well, so the vast majority of all the people that have had things that were, I guess they're called are they called comorbidities, pre-existing? How do you call
yeah,
it? I'm hearing all these terms.
Yeah, so in doctor speak, which I intended not to use, but it slipped, it is comorbidities is the way we refer to it. But the way, I think in common parlance, underlying medical condition or pre-existing condition, when people talk about it in the context of trying to get health insurance or life insurance. But, so it's referred to in a couple of different ways.
All right. So it sounds like the vast majority, over 80%, right, of people that are hospitalized with the coronavirus have this underlying condition, some other underlying conditions. It sounds like of all those conditions, most of them are something to do with their lifestyle. That's what it sounds like from what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I found really interesting is that for all those age groups, usually it looks like chronic lung disease, which you would think would be highly determinative of your risk for needing to be hospitalized for COVID-19. That usually came in around 3 or 4. But yes, to answer your question specifically, lifestyle plays a huge role in our underlying health. And as we can all imagine, the degree to which we're healthy predisposes us to all kinds of infections, including COVID-19.
Okay, yeah, I think this is important new information, because I feel like what I've seen anyway in the media is just that people are saying, all right, you've got to shelter in place, you've got to do the social distancing, you've got to protect these people that, even if you're okay, somebody else might not be okay, you got to protect them. But I think that there hasn't really been a message out there in the general media saying, well, if you feel, I don't know what the message would be. If you have a pre-existing condition, if you have a current medical condition like these, like you've been talking about, cardiovascular disease, obesity, high blood pressure, please do something now, right? Please, because these can be worked on in a relatively short period of time, can't they? I mean, you get results almost
Absolutely.
instantly, right?
Absolutely. You're raising a lot of really interesting points. So the first one is absolutely, first off, while we're sheltering in place, while we're focusing on protecting people who are at high risk, even if you're young, if you're obese or you have high blood pressure, especially high blood pressure that isn't controlled, you are one of those high risk individuals. You need to be especially careful. And as we go towards the transition of deciding who can be out in society working and who should be much more cautious, it's really important to make it clear to people that age is not the sole defining characteristic of someone who's at high risk. In fact, individuals who may think, oh yeah, I have high blood pressure, but I take a couple pills and it's fine. Well, no, you need to be extremely cautious with this virus and the way you decide to be out in society. And then your second point is really, really well taken, because there's a number of studies that have been done and shown that just changing someone's diet dramatically over the course of a week can get them weaned off their medications and reduce their blood pressure, even while getting off their medications, by 10 to 20 millimeters of mercury. So you can go from a blood pressure of that anyone would consider uncontrolled, let's say 150 over 100, and you can bring it down to 130 over 80, just in the matter of a week, a few weeks, a month. And in that situation, you would have to be pursuing an aggressively whole food, plant-based diet. So you're not going to get those kinds of results unless you make really powerful changes. But even making modest changes over the next couple of weeks or months, you will see an improvement, and that improvement will protect you.
You're saying you could have big changes, but that just the fact that that's possible, you know what I'm saying? That's not getting out to people. That's what I'm
Absolutely
in the coverage here.
Absolutely. And we're going to be dealing with this for, even the best estimates are a vaccine could be available in a year, 2 years, maybe the realistic estimate. And of course, prognosticating is not, is a little bit of a fool's errand. We've seen how much things have changed on a week-to-week basis, but it's really important to know we are very likely to be living with this for a long time. So we all should be thinking really hard about how can we improve our health so that we decrease our risk of getting sick, we decrease our risk of, having a really strong immune response that leads to others getting this, and continuing to burden our health system when we can do a lot ourselves to protect. It's not just hand washing, it's really bolstering our health through the way we eat, the way we exercise, and so forth. So.
Yeah, let me ask a question about the medications. You brought up the example of someone who has been diagnosed with high blood pressure and is on medication. Now, what does that mean in terms of your susceptibility to COVID-19? I mean, if you're on medication and you brought it down, does that mean that, oh, you're all good, you don't have to worry about this? Or does that mean that, I don't know, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We don't know for sure. So I would be talking out of turn because the data isn't that granular. We know that these people have the medical condition. We don't know to what degree their heart disease or, high blood pressure is under control or uncontrolled. So it would be difficult for me to say, well, you're more at risk if it's the pattern that we see across medicine is that if your blood pressure isn't controlled, or your diabetes isn't controlled, or your asthma isn't controlled, you're much more likely to get sick than if it is well controlled. But you're not out of the woods by having controlled high blood pressure, because again, these studies or these data reports don't distinguish between people who have blood pressure that's well controlled and those who don't. So I would say, even being on medications is a sign, despite your blood pressure being well controlled, that your body is is burdened with atherosclerotic plaque that you need to decrease, and your blood vessels are dysfunctional and you need to let them repair. And the way to do that is by making lifestyle changes.
Okay. Now, I've heard in the past that there's been examples of people who are on cholesterol medication, which I think is also related to this, that their
Absolutely.
numbers improve. But I've also heard, and I don't know if I haven't seen the studies, that even if you're on cholesterol meds and it lowers your numbers, that the death rate is not much different than people who are not on the cholesterol medication. Is that correct? Do you know about
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And that gets to a problem where in medicine, a lot of times these studies, the high quality studies, the randomized controlled trials, they're really expensive, and because they're so time consuming and expensive, we end up not really measuring in those randomized controlled trials, does the medication stop people from dying? What we do instead is we measure, does the medication lower the blood cholesterol? Because we know that there's a relatively predictable relationship between blood cholesterol levels and risk of dying down the road. But unfortunately, what we see typically with medications is that you can bring the cholesterol down much lower, and it does decrease your risk of death, but that decrease in risk of death is relatively modest compared to decreasing your risk of death by focusing on lifestyle changes, which will, decrease your cholesterol levels, perhaps even more modestly than the medication itself. But because it's affecting so many different aspects of your health, it ends up leading to a much bigger decrease in your risk of death 10 years down the line. So that's why there's that discrepancy. It's really about, what are you measuring?
Okay. All right. So to put this all together, if you've got some kind of a known health issue, it really would be in your best advantage, especially now with this coronavirus, to do something about, to the extent that you can with your lifestyle, to do something about that. Now, if you don't have anything, and this is for the regular Jane or Joe out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just living the standard American lifestyle, eating the standard American diet, even if they're not diagnosed, my guess would be they probably have some form of all of these conditions because they're brought about by the standard American lifestyle. It just may not be diagnosed. It may not be severe enough. So I would say this message goes out to everyone, whether you're diagnosed or not, whether you think you're healthy or not, unless you're eating an almost fully whole food plant-based diet and you're exercising regularly and doing all these other things that we know you should do to boost your immune system. I would think that, given this new information from this article, that everyone, if you're not already doing it, should go out there and try to improve your lifestyle with the food, number one, and exercise and other things beyond that. So if someone's out there, which is most of us, who aren't doing those things now, what is the best way for them to begin to do those things right now?
Well, that's another great question. First of all, let me just highlight what you said. I think you're absolutely right. We've done tons of studies. We can find atherosclerotic plaques, calcified plaques in 20-year-old infantrymen that were in Vietnam. They did autopsy studies and they found a relatively large plaque burden. So we know that a lot of these things that we start finding with our tests in 60-year-olds and 70-year-olds, we know that they're actually there at a much younger age. And you can even find fatty streaks, which are the precursor to all of this, in infants, especially young, babies that have poor diets. They start developing atherosclerosis, at an incredibly young age. So all of this stuff, and with the rise of obesity in children, we're seeing all of this process accelerate. So none of us are in the clear, because, like you point out, these diseases, we think about them as you either have it or you don't, but really it's a spectrum, and we're all somewhere along that spectrum, and we can all take this moment where maybe you have a little bit more time, maybe you don't, maybe you have kids at home and you're trying to educate, you're trying to keep your work going, but we all need to find ways. We all need to start working on habits. And I think that the easiest thing you can focus on is the way you're eating, because you have to eat anyway. So if you're baking a lot, stop baking junk and start making healthy foods. Stop buying processed Cheetos and Lay's potato chips and start eating carrots and celery with hummus. Just make some basic changes. Instead of eating the muffins and the brownies, buy some figs and prunes and, have them available. Buy apples and bananas and use those as your dessert. But just start making some changes to the way you eat, start eating better and start feeling better, so that when over time you start going along the path where if you were to, God forbid, get infected, that your body has some physiological reserve. It's more resilient because you've been enhancing its ability to ward off all of these infections.
Yeah, and I think hopefully everyone out there enjoys being alive, and is having a good time. It's the best that they can in their own dwelling unit where they probably are locked in right now. But still, I mean, you just got to keep that attitude. I guess remember, you want to be here, and everything you do matters. I suppose that's what I'm recognizing with all this information that's coming out. You think, like, I think a lot of times, well, when a big storm comes through with a lot of wind and a lot of rain, what does it take out? It takes out the weak things, right? Things that were built strong and sturdy and things that were growing well and taken care of, they survive. And I think the same is happening right now with this coronavirus. If people could recognize the analogy there, I feel like it's your immune system for humans right now, right? You got to do everything you can with that immune system, and then you will probably weather the storm. You probably will, right? But if you don't,
absolutely,
there'll be a direct correlation there. And the only question is, how bad is it going to get you? We don't want anyone to get hit bad with this. As I don't.
Absolutely. And then, the data that's come out of Italy has shown the same thing. Individuals who are hospitalized, if they have higher comorbidities, they're much more likely to be on a ventilator and have long lengths of stay in the ICU. Same with China. The rates of death are dramatically different among people who have comorbidities and who don't. So this isn't something that's just true of the United States, but we do have we have been on the path of trying to take shortcuts around the way we eat, the way we exercise, and our lifestyles, all of those ideas are coming home to roost. And I love what you said about enjoying living, because we all do enjoy living. And I think a lot of us think, oh yeah, well, I'm going to be unhealthy, but it may only hurt me on the back end. It's, if I live till I'm 85 instead of 90, no big deal. But look, we're all young right now. And we want to live, these are the best years of our lives, and who wants to lose this time now? There are young people who are dying of this infection. And so, I think it's one of the gifts of being a physician is that when you work in the hospital and you see so much sickness and death, you realize that the burying your head in the sand and the thinking that it'll never be me. Well, there's a lot of people who are sick right now who thought it could never be them. And so we really need to be a little bit more honest with ourselves about the fact that this disease can hit anybody. And it's on us now to do what we can to be healthier, and not just be healthier for this moment, but to be healthier so that we create a healthier America, because it's not just about fighting this one disease. It's about, we need to build health for this country because we need it. And this is just a really clear example of why it's so valuable.
Yeah. And I think that, unfortunately, so many other countries around the world want to be like the United States, and this is one of our bad habits that we're transmitting to other countries. I hope it stops, because we need to stop doing that. It's affecting everyone who is following these patterns that need to be changed. So hopefully they will be. And so thank you for being here and sharing this information with us. It's very, very important. And I think it'll be a big positive difference. I know we have some resources on our site, recipes on a plantbaseddiet.org. How about you? How can people get in touch with you so that you can help out if need be?
Great. Thanks for asking. Well, I have a newsletter that I write every week. It's called the Weekly Checkup, and you can go to my website, Nick Borja, MD, NickBorjaMD.com, and check that out. Yeah, check that out. It's a short newsletter, and I just try to summarize the emerging health research. I usually focus on a wide range of things: sleep, nutrition, stress, mindfulness. But it's been all COVID all the time lately.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's the topic. Well, thank you for
yeah,
having the correct knowledge. That's the thing. If anybody's questioning this, the knowledge is out there. The science is out there. We know what
it
to
is.
do. The only question is, are you going to do it? And this is, you're never going to be more motivated than right now, I would think, the average person. So
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not hard. It's not hard to pick up an audiobook. There's a lot of books about lifestyle change, about whether you want to have the intention of exercising more or eating better. You know, the resources are out there. Just start reading a book and let it kind of bathe you, and you know the motivation will come. You can dip your toe in the water. That's okay, but just get started.
Yeah, great advice there. Thank you so much, Dr. Nick.
Thank you.